Fix this engine, or prove you never belonged in this room to begin with. Victoria Hale's voice sliced clean through the polished steel and glass, sharp enough to still every movement in the garage. Conversations died mid-sentence. Tools hovered in midair. Even the hum of fluorescent lights seemed to dim under the weight of her words. She stood at the center of it all, heels planted on the concrete floor, tailored suit untouched by the grease-stained world around her, eyes locked on the man across from her like he was a problem waiting to be dismissed. Marcus Reed didn't answer. He didn't look away either. His hands, darkened with oil and time, rested at his sides for a fraction of a second before he stepped forward, slow and deliberate, as if the tension in the room belonged to everyone else but him. Someone near the back let out a quiet chuckle, quickly swallowed when Victoria didn't join in. The engine sat between them, open and exposed beneath harsh overhead lights, its components gleaming like something too precise to fail, and yet somehow already had. "You've got 10 minutes, she added, her tone cooling even further, the kind of calm that didn't invite negotiation. Marcus moved closer without asking permission. No badge of authority. No title. Just a man in worn boots stepping into a space where he clearly wasn't expected to matter. The air smelled like metal and heat, like something on the edge of breaking. He leaned in, eyes scanning, fingers hovering just above the surface before making contact, light, controlled, as if he could feel the flaw before he saw it. Around him, executives in press suits shifted their weight, exchanging glances that carried quiet disbelief. A mechanic. That's all they saw. Victoria watched without blinking, arms folded, posture perfect, but there was something tighter now in the set of her jaw, something almost imperceptible cracking beneath the surface of certainty. Seconds stretched. Then longer. The room didn't move. Marcus adjusted a single component, then another, movements precise, unhurried, like time answered to him instead of the other way around. No wasted motion. No hesitation. Just focus. The kind that doesn't come from guessing, but from knowing. A faint click echoed, barely louder than a breath, but it cut through the silence like a signal. Marcus paused. For the first time, he lifted his gaze not to the engine, but to Victoria. Not challenging. Not asking. Just steady. Then he turned the ignition. The response was immediate. The engine roared to life, smooth, controlled, almost too perfect for something that had been written off minutes earlier. The sound filled the garage, deep and even, vibrating through the concrete floor, through the air, through every assumption that had just been made about him. The laughter didn't return. No one spoke. Victoria didn't move. Her eyes flicked once, from the engine to Marcus, then back again, as if trying to reconcile two realities that didn't fit together anymore. Marcus stepped back, wiping his hands on a rag, calm as if nothing extraordinary had just happened. "It wasn't broken," he said quietly, his voice steady enough to carry through the silence without effort. "It was misread." And for a moment, the most powerful woman in the room had nothing to say. The engine continued to hum, low and steady, like it had always known how to breathe but had been waiting for someone to listen. No one moved. Not the engineers with their tablets frozen midair, not the executives standing along the glass wall pretending they understood what had just happened. Marcus Reed set the rag down beside the workbench, the fabric already dark with oil, and for a moment he simply stood there, eyes resting on the machine as if confirming something only he could see. The overhead lights reflected off the polished casing, sharp white lines cutting across metal that had nearly been dismissed as defective. Victoria Hale finally shifted, just a fraction, but enough for the room to feel it. Her arms loosened, then folded again, tighter this time, like she needed to hold something in place inside herself. "Explain it," she said, her voice lower now, stripped of the edge it carried before, but not softer. "Not yet." Marcus glanced at her, then back at the engine. "Your team followed the diagnostics," he said, calm, measured, each word placed with care. "But the system was reading the wrong variable. It flagged a failure that was not actually there." A faint murmur rippled through the group behind her. Someone tapped rapidly on a tablet, trying to verify what he was saying, trying to catch up to a moment that had already passed them. Victoria stepped closer, heels clicking once against the concrete before stopping just short of the engine. The sound echoed in the space, sharp, controlled, like everything else about her. That system was designed by the best engineers in the country, she said. It does not make that kind of mistake. Marcus did not argue. He simply reached forward again, tapping lightly on a specific panel, then stepping aside just enough for her to see. It does when the assumptions behind it are wrong, he replied. The words did not rise. They did not challenge. They just landed, steady as weight. Victoria's gaze followed where he pointed. For a brief second, something flickered across her face. Not confusion. Recognition. And then it was gone, replaced by the same controlled composure she had walked in with. But the room had already seen it. One of the senior engineers stepped forward, hesitant, almost unsure if he had permission. He adjusted his glasses, leaned in, and then froze. This cannot be right. He muttered under his breath, more to himself than anyone else. We would have caught this. Marcus did not look at him. You were not looking for it, he said quietly. Silence again. Thicker this time. He stepped back fully now, giving the space back to them, to their titles and their authority, and everything that had existed before he touched the engine. Victoria remained where she was, eyes still on the panel, as if the answer she had trusted was now dissolving in front of her. The steady hum of the engine filled the gap where certainty used to live. And for the first time since she walked into that garage, Victoria Hale was not in control of what came next. Run the full system, Victoria said, her voice steady again, but now there was something sharper beneath it, something searching. No one questioned her this time. The command moved through the room like a current. Screens flickered to life along the glass wall, lines of data cascading in real time, numbers climbing, stabilizing, shifting. The engine continued its low, controlled hum, but now it was no longer the center of attention. The system was. Marcus remained where he was, slightly off to the side, no longer touching anything, no longer needed to prove anything. His hands rested loosely at his sides, shoulders relaxed, as if the outcome had never been in doubt for him. One of the engineers called out readings, his voice tight, trying to stay composed. Thermal levels are holding. No spike. No deviation. Another voice followed, quicker, more urgent. Power distribution is stable across all channels. The murmurs grew, not loud, but enough to carry the shift in tone. Confusion turning into realization. Victoria watched the screens without blinking, her reflection faintly visible in the glass, layered over the data she had trusted for months. Check the fail-safe triggers, she said. All of them. Fingers moved faster now. Commands executed. Systems tested. And then a pause. Not long, but noticeable. The kind of pause that only happens when something does not behave the way it is supposed to. There is a delay, one of the engineers said carefully. The system is responding, but not to the original diagnostic parameters. Victoria turned her head slightly, just enough to look at Marcus again. Because the parameters were wrong, he said before she could ask. No hesitation. No pride. Just fact. She held his gaze this time, longer than before, as if trying to measure something that could not be calculated on any screen in the room. And you saw that, she said. In minutes. Marcus shook his head once. I saw what it was trying to do, he replied. Not what it was told to do. The distinction settled into the air, heavier than anything that had been said so far. Around them, the system continued to run, each passing second confirming the same truth. The engine was never the problem. The interpretation was. Victoria stepped closer to the main console, her hand hovering just above the controls before finally pressing a sequence that shut the system down. The hum faded. The screens dimmed. Silence returned, but it was different now. Not empty. Not waiting. Full. Full of everything that had just shifted. She exhaled slowly, almost imperceptibly, then turned back to Marcus. For the first time, there was no distance in her posture, no barrier of authority separating them. Just two people standing in the same space, looking at the same reality from different paths. "Where did you learn that?" she asked. The question was simple, but it carried weight now. Not dismissal. Not doubt. Recognition. Marcus did not answer right away. His eyes moved briefly across the garage, over the tools, the machines, the people who had watched him without seeing him. Then back to her. "I paid attention," he said quietly. No explanation. No credentials. Just truth. And somehow, it was enough to make the room feel smaller than it had before. "Stop the external release schedule," Victoria said suddenly, her voice cutting through the heavy silence before anyone else could speak. The words landed fast, sharp enough to freeze the few remaining whispers in the room. Heads turned. Not toward Marcus this time, but toward her. One of the executives near the glass wall stepped forward, hesitant but unable to stay silent. "Victoria, we are 48 hours from rollout. The investors will wait," she said, not raising her voice, but ending the sentence before it could fully form. The authority was still there, but it no longer felt untouchable. It felt recalibrated. She turned back to the console, her reflection faint against the darkened screens, then tapped a sequence that locked the system from external deployment. A soft tone confirmed it. Final. No reversal without her approval. The room shifted again, not with confusion this time, but with something closer to unease. Plans were changing. Decisions were being rewritten in real time. And all of it traced back to a man who, minutes ago, had been standing at the edge of the room unnoticed. Marcus watched without moving, his gaze steady, not surprised, not impressed. Just present. One of the senior engineers approached him now, slower than before, like he was stepping into unfamiliar territory. "You said the system was reading the wrong variable," he began, adjusting his glasses again, his voice more careful this time. "What exactly did you change?" Marcus glanced at him briefly, then back at the engine, now quiet again. "Nothing permanent," he said. "I just corrected the input long enough to show you the truth." The engineer frowned slightly, trying to process that. "That is not a standard adjustment." Marcus gave a small, almost unnoticeable shrug. Neither was the problem. A few people exchanged looks. Not dismissive anymore. Thinking. Victoria stepped closer again, this time not to the console, but to Marcus himself. The distance between them closed by a few feet, but it felt larger than that. "You interfered with a closed system," she said. The statement was direct, but there was no accusation in it. Just fact. Marcus met her gaze. "I prevented a mistake," he replied. For a second, the air tightened again. Not hostile. Just balanced on the edge of something that had not yet been defined. Victoria studied him, her eyes moving over his face, his posture, the calm that had not shifted once since she walked in. "Do you understand what this system controls?" she asked. "Every unit we ship. Every mile driven. Every person who trusts what we build." Marcus nodded once. "That is why I did not walk away." The words settled deeper than anything before. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just undeniable. Around them, the room had gone completely still again, but this time no one was waiting for failure. They were waiting for her. Victoria inhaled slowly, then exhaled, the movement subtle but visible if you were looking for it. When she spoke again, her voice had changed. Not weaker. Not softer. Clearer. "Then you are going to show us everything we missed," she said. It was not a request. It was not a command either. It was something else. Something closer to acknowledgement. Marcus did not hesitate. "All right," he said. And for the first time since the engine started, he stepped forward again, not as someone proving himself, but as someone who had already been proven. Marcus stepped into the center of the space without looking back, his presence shifting the room in a way no title ever had. The overhead lights reflected across the engine as he reached in again, not to fix it this time, but to reveal it. You built this system to predict failure, he said, his voice calm, steady enough to anchor every eye on him. But you trained it to expect the wrong patterns. A few engineers exchanged glances, uneasy now, no longer certain where the boundaries of their expertise ended. Marcus continued, fingers tracing along the cable, then pausing at a junction most had ignored. Right here, he said, tapping lightly. This is where your system starts to lie to you. The words landed heavier than before. Not insulting. Not dramatic. Just precise. One of the senior engineers stepped closer, leaning in, his earlier confidence now replaced with something more fragile. That component feeds into the core diagnostic loop, he said, almost defensively. It has been validated multiple times. Marcus nodded once. It has, he replied. But only under conditions you expected. He straightened slightly, giving them space to see what he saw. You tested for what could go wrong, he added. You never tested for what could look right, and still be wrong. Silence. Deeper this time. The kind that settles when certainty begins to collapse quietly instead of breaking apart. Victoria stood just behind him now, closer than before, her gaze fixed on the exact point he indicated. Show me, she said. No hesitation. No resistance. Marcus reached toward the console, not asking permission, but not overstepping either. He entered a sequence slowly, deliberately, each input visible, each action transparent. The screens flickered back to life, but this time the data looked different. Not chaotic. Not broken. Just misaligned. Values that appeared stable began to shift when viewed through a different parameter. Small discrepancies. Barely noticeable. Until they were not. There, Marcus said quietly. That is the drift. One of the engineers inhaled sharply. That margin is within acceptable tolerance, he said quickly. Marcus glanced at him. At 5 miles per hour, yes, he replied. At 70 it compounds. The room stilled again. Numbers recalculated in real time. Models adjusted. And then the realization began to spread, not all at once, but piece by piece, face by face. The system had not failed. It had misled. And they had trusted it anyway. Victoria did not move. Her eyes followed the shifting data, her expression unreadable, but her silence said enough. If this goes into production, Marcus continued, not raising his voice, not forcing urgency, it will pass every basic test. Until it does not. No one interrupted him. No one dismissed him. Because now, they could see it too. One of the executives near the back spoke, his voice tight. How long before it becomes critical? Marcus did not answer immediately. He looked at the data, then at the engine, then back at Victoria. Sooner than you would want, he said. The weight of that answer settled into the room like gravity. No alarms. No chaos. Just truth, sitting where confidence used to be. Victoria finally stepped forward, closer to the console, closer to Marcus, her hand resting lightly against the edge as if grounding herself in something real. And without your adjustment? She asked. Marcus met her gaze. You would have shipped it, he said. No blame. No accusation. Just fact. And that was what made it impossible to ignore. No one spoke after that. The data still glowed faintly on the screens, numbers holding their new shape like they had been waiting to be seen correctly all along. Marcus stepped back, just a half step, enough to remove himself from the center without leaving the moment. His hands were still, the faint sheen of oil catching the light, his breathing steady, unchanged. Around him, the room seemed to forget how to move. The air felt heavier, not with tension, but with the quiet weight of something undeniable settling in. Victoria did not look at him right away. Her eyes remained on the screen, tracing the same lines again, slower this time, as if the truth might shift if she stared long enough. It did not. The drift was still there. Small. Consistent. Real. Her fingers pressed lightly against the edge of the console, not gripping, just resting, like she needed something solid beneath her hand. A faint reflection of her face stared back from the dark glass, sharper. Now that the system had dimmed. For a brief moment, her expression softened, not into weakness, but into something more human. Something quieter. "We trusted the model," one of the engineers said from behind her, his voice low, almost uncertain. It was not a defense. It sounded more like a realization spoken out loud. Marcus did not turn. "You trusted what it showed you," he replied. "Not what it meant." The words did not cut. They settled. And no one argued. A soft mechanical tick echoed somewhere in the garage, the cooling engine adjusting to stillness, metal contracting just enough to be heard in the silence. It was the only sound for several seconds. Victoria finally exhaled, slow and controlled, but deeper than before. She straightened slightly, her posture returning, but not in the same way it had been when she first walked in. This time it felt grounded, not distant. She turned her head just enough to look at Marcus again, her gaze steady, no longer measuring him, no longer dismissing him. Seeing him. Really seeing him. "How long have you known?" she asked quietly. Marcus paused, just briefly, his eyes moving across the engine one more time before answering. "Long enough to know no one was listening," he said. The answer was simple, but it carried something else beneath it. Not bitterness. Not anger. Just truth shaped by time. Victoria held his gaze for a second longer, then looked away again, not to avoid him, but to think. The room did not rush her. No one filled the silence. For once, they let it exist. She stepped back from the console, her heels softer now against the concrete, the sound less sharp than before. The distance between her and the system grew by a few feet, but the weight of it stayed with her. She glanced around the room, at the engineers, the executives, the people who had built everything she trusted. Then back to Marcus. "We missed it," she said, not loudly, not dramatically, but clearly enough that every person heard it. No one corrected her. No one softened it. Because they all knew it was true. The engine, now quiet, reflected the overhead lights like a mirror, its surface smooth, unchanged, but somehow different in the way it was. Understood. Marcus reached for the rag again, folding it once in his hands, not as a gesture, but as something familiar, something grounding. He did not step forward. He did not step back. He just stood there, part of the moment without trying to own it. And in that stillness, something shifted that no system, no model, no data could ever predict. The silence did not break all at once. It shifted slowly, like something unseen turning beneath the surface. Victoria remained still for a moment longer, then reached forward and reactivated the system. But this time her movements were different, deliberate in a way that suggested she was no longer following the process, she was questioning it. The screens lit up again, but instead of running the standard diagnostics, she paused, her finger hovering above the input panel. "Show me the original baseline," she said. No one moved at first. Then the senior engineer nodded quickly and adjusted the controls. The data reset, returning to the version they had trusted for months. Clean. Stable. Reassuring. Victoria stared at it, then glanced at Marcus. "This is what we approved," she said. It was not a question. Marcus nodded once. "Yes," he replied. She looked back at the screen, then without hesitation, she overlaid the corrected parameters Marcus had introduced. The numbers shifted again. Not dramatically. Not violently. Just enough to expose the difference. Side by side, the truth became impossible to ignore. One was comfort. The other was reality. Victoria leaned in slightly, her eyes narrowing, not in disbelief, but in focus. "Run a projection," she said. 70 miles per hour. Highway conditions. The room reacted instantly this time. No hesitation. Commands entered. Simulations launched. The system processed, faster now, almost eager to reveal what had been hidden. The first few seconds showed nothing unusual. Stable readings. Controlled output. Exactly what they expected. Then, slowly, the drift appeared. A fraction at first. Then another. Small deviations stacking quietly, each one insignificant on its own, but together forming a pattern that could no longer be ignored. A line on the graph began to curve. Not sharply. Not dramatically. Just enough. There, Marcus said softly, not pointing, not interrupting, just acknowledging what they all saw. One of the engineers swallowed, his voice barely steady. It escalates after 23 minutes, he said. At sustained speed. Another voice followed. By 30 it exceeds safe tolerance. The room did not react with panic. It did not need to. The numbers spoke clearly enough. Victoria straightened slowly, her gaze still fixed on the screen as the projection completed its cycle. The final values settled into place, and with them, the full weight of what had almost happened. She turned the simulation off. The screens dimmed again. This time, the silence that followed was not uncertain. It was final. She looked at Marcus, not as someone who had interrupted her authority, but as someone who had revealed its limits. You did not just fix an engine, she said quietly. You stopped us from making a very expensive mistake. Marcus held her gaze, his expression unchanged. Not expensive, he replied. Just avoidable. The correction was subtle, but it shifted the meaning entirely. Victoria absorbed that, her posture still, her mind clearly moving behind her eyes. Around them, no one spoke. No one moved to reclaim the narrative. Because it no longer belonged to them. It had changed. And they all felt it. For the first time since the beginning, the room was not waiting for Victoria to lead. It was waiting for her to understand. And when she finally nodded, just once, it was not approval. It was acceptance. Victoria did not speak immediately after that nod. The silence stretched, but it was no longer uncertain. It was deliberate. She stepped away from the console, her heels quieter now against the concrete, and turned fully toward Marcus. For the first time since she entered the garage, there was no distance in her stance, no invisible line separating position from presence. Just recognition. What is your name? She asked. The question was simple, but the weight behind it had changed completely. Marcus met her gaze steady as before. Marcus Reed, he replied. No hesitation. No added explanation. Just truth, offered plainly. Victoria nodded once, as if committing it to memory. Around them, the room remained still, but the attention had shifted entirely. Not toward the system. Not toward the engine. Toward him. Marcus, she repeated, quieter this time, testing the name in a space that had not made room for it before. She glanced briefly at the team behind her, then back at him. You saw something none of us did, she said. It was not praise. It was acknowledgement. Marcus did not react. I saw what was there, he answered. Victoria held that for a moment, then took another step closer, closing the last bit of distance that had remained between them. And you spoke up, she added. There was a pause. Not long. Just enough to let the implication settle. Marcus's eyes shifted slightly, not away, but inward, as if the memory behind that moment was not as simple as it sounded. I almost did not, he said quietly. The words changed the air again. Subtle, but real. Victoria's expression softened, just enough to show she understood what that meant. But you did, she replied. Marcus gave a small nod. Because it mattered, he said. No emphasis. No need. The room absorbed that in silence. One of the executives shifted his stance, as if about to speak, then stopped. There was nothing to add. Victoria exhaled slowly, her posture straightening again, but not into distance, into clarity. She turned slightly toward the team, her voice carrying just enough to reach everyone without rising. We are halting all external deployment until this system is rebuilt from the ground up, she said. No one questioned it. No one argued. The decision had already been made long before she spoke it. She turned back to Marcus, her gaze steady, but now carrying something else beneath it. Not authority. Not control. Respect. I made a mistake, she said. The words were quiet, but they landed heavier than anything else in the room. No justification. No explanation. Just truth. Marcus did not respond right away. His hands remained still, the rag folded once between them, his posture unchanged. We all miss things, he said finally. The response was simple, but it removed the weight of blame without denying the reality of it. Victoria studied him for a moment longer, then gave a small nod, not as a leader closing a conversation, but as a person accepting something real. Not like that, she said softly. The difference remained. She stepped back slightly, creating space again, but this time it was not distance. It was balance. The room, once defined by hierarchy, now felt level in a way no one had planned. And in that quiet shift, something more than a system had been corrected. The room did not rush to fill the space after her words. It held them, quietly, like something that deserved to stay a little longer. Victoria turned away first, not abruptly, but with intention, her gaze drifting back toward the engine that had started it all. It sat exactly where it had been, unchanged in form, but no longer the same in meaning. The overhead lights reflected across its surface in clean lines, steady and unbroken, like the hum it had carried earlier. Marcus remained where he was for a moment, then stepped toward the workbench, placing the folded rag down with a small, deliberate motion. The sound was soft, barely noticeable, but in the stillness it carried. No one stopped him. No one asked him to stay. For the first time, he did not need permission to leave, and he did not need acknowledgement to matter. Victoria watched him from across the space, her expression calm, but no longer distant. Marcus, she said, not loudly but enough. He paused. Just long enough to turn his head slightly, not fully, just enough to show he had heard her. She took a step forward, then another, closing the distance once more, but this time without urgency, without tension. We are going to rebuild this system, she said. And I want you involved. The offer hung in the air, not as a transaction, not as a reward, but as a shift. Marcus considered it, his eyes steady, his posture unchanged. For a second, the room seemed to lean toward him, waiting. He glanced at the engine, then at the people around it, then back at Victoria. Build it right, he said quietly. It was not acceptance. Not refusal. Just a condition, simple and clear. Victoria nodded once. We will, she replied. No hesitation. No embellishment. Just truth, meeting truth. Marcus gave a small nod in return, then turned fully this time, walking toward the exit at the edge of the garage. His steps were even, unhurried, boots meeting concrete with a soft, steady rhythm that faded as he moved farther away. No one followed. No one called after him. The door at the far end opened with a muted sound, letting in a thin line of daylight that cut across the floor.